then we can kind of just roll with it.
Love
That
it.
work for you?
Yep. Great.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody, welcome to another Death to Vanilla podcast. We talk about content marketing and strategy and basically just doing marketing things that help you stand out so you get noticed instead of get ignored, because people can't do business with a business that they don't know about. And so you got to have attention, right? And so I'm super excited because we've been talking a lot about relationship building in the podcast. We talk a lot about doing like bold marketing and doing cool new things. But Meredith Boggs, who's our guest today, is incredible. And she has a podcast. It's a podcast, right? Of the other half, or is it a blog and a podcast?
Yeah, it started out as a blog and now it's a podcast as well. So
Perfect. Because then you can transcribe the podcast and then you just have more content.
right.
It's amazing. And so she talks about the other half, which is basically like and you can deep dive into it, but it's the other half of life that you don't see on social media that is still the very real part of different people's lives. And so I'm excited to talk with her because I think what we'll dive into is a little bit about having authenticity. And I think authenticity is a way to stand out as well. Not everything has to be fireworks shows. You can stand out just by being an authentic voice inside of an industry. So anyways, so without further ado, Meredith, if you could introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about what the Other Half blog is all about and kind of where your passion started with that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. A little bit about me. I'm a born and raised Nashville girl. I live here in Nashville still with my husband. We are high school sweethearts, and we just had our first baby 4 months ago at the time of this recording. So
Woohoo!
Jack, who he decided he didn't want to take a nap this afternoon, so he's just hanging out here with us. My background, I actually graduated with a nursing degree and have practiced as a nurse for the last 10 years, and that's kind of looked a little bit different, evolved somewhat. But I always knew that I always loved to write and kind of knew that like somewhere down the road I would write a few books, and I don't know, it would be part of my life in some way. And so I had a blog in college. I started one and just kind of like, it's just a little Tumblr blog that I would post on infrequently. And then probably about 6 years ago, it was actually while we were living overseas. We were living in China, so literally on the other side of the world. It was a 14-hour time difference from all of our friends and family back here. So, and we worked a lot. I mean, we would put in like 60 to 80-hour work weeks. We were working for a nonprofit that provided medical and surgical care for orphan children. So we worked a ton, but then when we weren't working, there really wasn't a ton, like we couldn't leave the hospital and go wander that far because the kids we took care of were pretty sick. So in my free time, I just took a deep dive. I rebranded, relaunched my blog, and just was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start pursuing this dream of getting published and really writing more intentionally. So that was when, that's kind of when I feel like I really actually started blogging, was about 6 years ago. And then the podcast. Yeah. So the blog, it kind of, a lot of what I've written a lot about marriage. I've written a lot just about personal growth, faith, kind of a lot of different topics. But I would say that the underpinning of it all is trying to highlight, just talk about the other half of life that doesn't make the highlight reel.
Mm-hmm.
With social media, people that remember life before it, it was just kind of like you just lived your life. And now that there's social media, there's such a different, the world is so different, and you only see the highlights of people's life. You don't actually see the everyday stuff, the ordinary, the mundane, the boring, or even the hard things that are not, not so bright and shiny. And it kind of makes you, it just becomes, it's just this highlight reel culture that we're constantly being impressed. It's just, we're constantly seeing it, and that kind of becomes ingrained in our beliefs that this is other people's normal life or real life. And it is part of life, but that's only half of it. And so so the blog really just kind of tried to turn over that stone and say there's actually something else here. And so And then the podcast was born out of that. It was one of those things that I love podcasts, love listening to them. And people were like, oh, yeah, you should do a podcast. And I was like, no, 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 I don't have time for that. I don't want to do that. And then finally, my husband was like, we should do it together. And I was like, fine, but you have to do all the work. And so he was good. He was good. So we launched the Other Half podcast a couple years back, and we co-host that together. He is my husband, Justin. He is an entrepreneur. And he is also trained in the Enneagram. So we talk a lot about the Enneagram on the podcast, and a lot about relationships, marriage, entrepreneurship. But yeah, just kind of talking about the other half that doesn't always make the highlight reel. So yeah, so that's kind of the backstory on that, and just kind of what that's all about.
Cool. I just realized that in all the times of talking, I don't know what number you are, and so I just want to make a little guess.
Oh yeah.
Are you a 1?
No, but that's really funny because I originally, when I first was introduced to the Enneagram, I tested as a 1. And I think that I have a lot of one characteristics. My older sister is a 1. I don't know what my mom is, but she's got a lot of one tendencies.
Yeah.
And so when I was first introduced to the Enneagram, it was, I was in high school and I was in counseling for an eating disorder. So all of my behaviors were very in line with the 1. And that's what I took it as. But then my therapist gave me a book and she's like, here, read about all the types. And after reading it and after diving into it in counseling sessions, it was like, oh no, you are very much an 8. And all of my motivations and everything is very aligned with an 8. But I do notice in seasons of transition and stress that I will definitely, like, I can get kind of rigid about things and pretty perfectionistic. And
right.
So, yeah. So that's funny that you asked that.
Well, the reason I ask is because you've got very color-coded bookshelves.
Oh, I do. You know what? It just makes my heart happy. It's beautiful. And my husband thinks it is the most. He just thinks it is the most impractical thing ever. He's like, I don't know how you find anything. I'm like, I know exactly where it is. I know what color. I know. I'm visual like that. So. But yeah.
He says that like people actually alphabetically order their books. Like, who does that?
Exactly. I don't know who does that. These books aren't alphabetized. So I'm like, listen, just let me be. You do you. I'm gonna do me. Have my free bookshelf. I like it like that.
Right. No, that's great. There was I was doing some video work for an Enneagram series my church was doing, and one of the things was for the 1, if you had organized your books based on the Dewey Decimal System or by color, and so apparently that's a 1 thing. And so then we jump on here and I see like, oh, red, yellow, blue. Oh, your stuff's color coded. You could be a 1.
Yeah, there have been times that I'm like, I think I really could be a 1, but then I look at the motivation and I'm like, yeah, I have a lot of the characteristics, but not the motivation. So
right. So when you're looking for like, when you talk about the other half, what exactly are you sharing? Like, do you kind of really intentionally share other parts of your life on social media or in your blog, or what is it that you're kind of like shedding light on when you kind of unpack a little bit about the other half of life that isn't so highlightable?
Yeah, honestly, it's a lot of it is just kind of it's nothing wild, it's nothing crazy. It's just the normal struggles that I think most people face, but a lot of us don't talk about because I don't know, it makes us feel like we're crazy or we're the only one or something. Like sometimes on our podcast we'll talk about the most recent conflict that we've had, or a lot of it's just kind of personal, like stumblings and failings in my own faith journey, in my walk with God, things that I wrestle with. And a lot of this, interesting, was born out of the time that I started my blog when we were living abroad. I grew up in a church, had always, like, it was always had, had a very solid foundation. And it wasn't probably until high school and then college that I really feel like my faith became my own. And it was like, okay, I don't understand this, but like I get redemption, I get grace. Like this, it's not just this thing that you learn when you're 6 years old and you're like, oh yeah, Jesus died for my sins. And so, but then, when we were living abroad, it was like being confronted for the first time of like, there's a lot of really horrible, awful things in this world, suffering of children, it is really hard to reconcile this with a God that is sovereign and a God that's good. And
Mm.
so a lot of that I feel like is this stuff that like if you walk with the Lord long enough, you're gonna wrestle with Him about that. And but it's not. I think I think some people I think there's just some circles, the church being one of them, that's not always, it's not really okay to talk about that in some settings.
Mm.
I think we're getting a lot better at it, but that's the kind of stuff that I kind of originally started talking about, and that we just continued the conversation of it's okay to really not know how you feel about this or what you think, or it's okay to wander, and it's okay to ask questions, um and then I tell people a little bit, another part of our faith journey coming out of that. We moved back from China, and then pretty quickly we came back, and then the church that we had been a part of, that we'd grown up going to, they were launching a new campus. So we jumped on board for that, because we had just gotten back from a year overseas, and our church that we grew up going to was kind of big. It was hard to get connected, kind of reconnected, I guess. And so we're like, okay, this might be a really good way to plant a church more in the area of the city that we were living in, really dive into that. And if anyone has ever been a part of a church plant, it is not for the faint of heart, and you do everything.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, we were coming off of a season of just being completely poured out overseas, and then jump into church planting, and so it was just a wild ride. And so probably
Whatever you have left, let's pour that out too.
take all of it. So a couple years into that, I think we were just we were at a pretty bad and burnout place, and we just kind of said, we need to step back. But we both went away for a week and did some pretty intensive individual counseling, with a place called Onsite here in Tennessee. And so that season was like a really hard reset. And out of that, we kind of just started, we just took a little hiatus from church, and then we just didn't go back for a while. And we were like, oh, we're looking for a church. And really what we were doing is we were just doing like the classic church hopping, church shopping, like approaching it from a very consumeristic standpoint. And we were like, but I don't like the worship leader, but I don't like the pastor, but I don't like this. And it was just all very like, it was just like, I look back and I'm like, I'm thankful for that season because of what God did in my heart. But I look back and I'm like, oh, that's so gross. I can't believe that I did that for that long. And so anyways, but that was a couple years that we just kind of like we were not connected. We weren't plugged in. We just were not. And honestly, we were pretty, I would say, I'll speak for myself, but just pretty stagnant in my faith, really. But also realizing at the time, it's like, gotta know that you're gracious and you're kind, and you're not. I'm not out. I'm not long gone. I'm not too far from your grasp, but you'll be ready when I'm ready, and when I kind of return from this strange season of wandering. And and so I think, and so that's some of it too, that I think people don't always have they just don't have a space to be like, I grew up in this and I still want to believe it, but I'm having a hard time. This is what I can't reconcile. And then the church sucks with this. And I'm getting like very much on a tangent, but that to me is the other half, that it's like, people don't really talk about, kind of people just don't talk about that half of life. So.
Well, it kind of seems like at the root of it, people in general just don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. Because, I mean, that's really what it is. Like, because we can kind of talk a little bit about, being authentic on social media, but the reality is we kind of have to be authentic in person first. And so, like you said, if you're having doubts or questions about something, whether it's your faith or whether it's your marriage or whether it's your purpose in life or whatever else, sometimes those honest, it's like when people are like, hey, how you doing? They don't want a real answer.
No.
They want to hear that you're good and you're busy.
Yes.
And if you add too much more to it than that, like they're not going to ask again.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that authenticity, if that's something that people are wanting to begin pursuing on their social medias, like that's something they actually have to be pursuing in real life, offline first, which is it's just hard. Like they're the uncomfortable. Uncomfortable conversations are uncomfortable, believe it or not. And so it's hard.
And yeah, like you said, they happen offline, they happen in real life. And that's why I'm so passionate about, I love social media, but get off of it and go make real friends, get in real community. My husband, every Thursday night he hosts a poker night. Every other Thursday night I host a wine night, and I post on my Instagram. I'm like, hey, come to my house this time. But for me, that's part of like, let's get offline and let's actually get in person together, because I think it's really easy to kind of feel like this counterfeit connection, like you're connected to a lot of people, but it's like, no, we're actually not. We're just like scrolling by, double tapping, liking this, liking that, but there's no connection, there's no community in it, there's no authenticity, and there's no accountability there. And so yeah, it's just, I think social media, for all of the great things it's brought, it's also given us this sort of counterfeit connection that we think that we're connected with people, but we're actually just kind of looking at each other's lives passing by and not actually interacting.
Right. So why is it, do you think that is, that people struggle with that so much, with that deeper connection?
I think, well, first of all, because I think it's uncomfortable. And then I think too, with the emergence of social media, it's just easier to stay behind that. I've talked to so many people throughout 2020, which was a wild year for everyone, and now that everyone's kind of emerging from that and things are opening back up, people are so hungry for connection and community, but realizing that it takes a lot of effort. And I wonder what your experience is with this as a 5. As an 8, I have a ton of energy, but I'm also pretty introverted, and so I have to put things on my calendar with people to get out of the house and to go be intentional. I have to, rather than just being like, oh yeah, let's hang out sometime, and then 5 years later it's like, oh yep, still haven't hung out with that person. I have to actually text them and be like, hey, can you go to coffee on this day at this time, or let's get together, and do this on this day. And it's simple, but it's hard. I don't know what, and I don't ever want to say, like, I don't ever want people to think like I mean it's easy by saying it's simple, because some of the simplest things that I do are the hardest, like sitting my butt in the chair at 5 o'clock in the morning to get my to write my chapters. It's very simple, but it doesn't mean that it's easy.
True.
I think connection and community building, that it's pretty simple, but it's not easy. And I think a lot of it, I know, and this is so silly because I do this all the time, but I'm like, oh, this person's probably busy. The fact of the matter is, they're probably not. It's like last year in 2020, what were we all doing? We were all sitting in our houses. And I know that, people are so Zoom fatigued out that they're like, I can't do any more FaceTime happy hours. I can't do any more Zoom. I get that. But we're at a place now that it's like, pick up the phone, call somebody, go on a walk with them, meet them for coffee, meet them for lunch, meet them for drinks or something. And for me, it's like, get out of bed and go to church on Sunday mornings. It's like, now that everything went virtual and you still have that option, it's like, oh, I'll just sleep in. But there's something about going and being at church, with physically being in a space with other people, that is so good for us, so good for our mental health, so good for our physical health. And I don't know, I think it's just, it's hard because what you risk is that you showed up, and if you don't get that connection that you are longing for and that you're seeking, it's more painful than just kind of not showing up at all and not even giving yourself. It's kind of like this self-sabotage situation that if I don't show up, then I won't get hurt, or I won't feel left out or anything. But yeah, it's just, it can be a dark spiral that gets bad real fast.
Well, I think the irony is, is that we have so many more ways of connecting with people, and it just doesn't seem to work that way. You know what I mean? Because like if you think about it, like okay, like just for the sake of argument, I'm not suggesting this, but let's just say, for example, you couldn't grab coffee. Like you can still video call people on Instagram. Like you can still literally see their face. And while it is not the same thing, how else?
Yeah.
In like the last 10 years, were you able to communicate with someone almost like it's in person from someone who was out of state or out of country or just too busy to drive 20 minutes down the road or whatever, you know what I mean? Like when have we had that kind of opportunity to see people's lives on display, to be able to communicate with them and talk to them in such a visual medium, and yet we just don't do that. And it's funny because when I talk to marketers and business owners, the reality is they're on social media, but they're not always treating it like it's social. You know what I mean? It's just like a billboard for them, but that's not how you have to use it. Like you can literally talk to a customer in another state and you didn't have to go to the state. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. It is wild because it's like you said, it's right there. It's so instant, but why is it that we feel disconnected? And I think a lot of kind of what they call like in the therapy world, kind of like these like diseases or disorders of connection, like anxiety, ADD, depression, all these things that are skyrocketing, that really the root of them goes, it's a connection issue with themselves, with other people. And it's so it's terribly ironic that in a world that we have the ability to connect so instantly in ways that we've never been able to before, why are our depression, anxiety, ADD rates, like why is that through the roof? And yeah, I mean, not to minimize the impact of 2020 and recent events in the world, but it's also like we have the ability, and at some point it falls back on us to
Mm.
put ourselves out there, to reach out to other people. And I mean, I first and foremost am speaking to myself, because I know that I need to, like, there's kind of rhythms in my life that I know that I need to have. I know that I need to exercise every day, whether it's just walk a mile with, throw the kid in the stroller, go walk a mile. I know that I need to connect with people on a regular basis. There's just kind of some rhythms in my life, but they're also the easiest things to just kind of be like, oh, I'm too busy. Oh, I'm too tired. I'm not going to do this. But the simple things are kind of what ground you and keep you connected and out of that space of anxiety, depression, just kind of like that general disconnection from people in life. So
Right. Well, I think on both a personal and a professional level, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is you almost have to go to this place where you have to like schedule this kind of stuff. Like I'm historically terrible at connecting with people who I genuinely like and genuinely enjoy talking to, but because they're not in my circle of activity, I literally just don't ever talk to them. And it's not on purpose, it's not personal. It's just because of the fact that they're not, at the church where I'm going, or they're not where I'm working, or they're not at the coffee shop. Like I'm just not going to talk to them. And there's no way to maintain a relationship. And I think even on the business end of things, it's like, okay, like I'm a business, and I'm sure you feel this way too, because you have a business as well that can be broadcast online. Is like you kind of think that you're going to go on Instagram and have all these great conversations with people, but then you don't. Like you kind of expect it to happen naturally, but it doesn't really happen naturally. So then you're kind of like, okay, well then maybe I really do need to schedule like interaction time in my schedule. So, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., I'm going to get on Instagram and I'm not scrolling. I'm finding people on my follower list and I'm saying, hello, how you doing? Is there anything I can help you with? How's your June going? Just anything.
yeah,
Because I think we really want it to happen organically, and it just doesn't work that way. So I don't know if that's just me. I somehow doubt it. But I'd love to hear like what you've done when like you like have you intentionally tried to reach out more, especially with your building your business, or have you had to schedule it? Like how have you managed that? Because that's a tough one.
yeah, yes, it is. Gosh, yeah, and kind of what you're saying is like, it's so convicting to me too, because there's people like that in my life that like friends that I've had for 20 years now that it's like I love them and they live, they live 20 minutes on the other side of town, but I have not seen them or talked to them in longer than I would like to admit. And it's really embarrassing.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't go to my church. I don't run into you at the grocery store down the street, And so for me, again, like it's simple, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. For me, I a lot of what I have done recently, and I'm on a campaign to bring this back, just talking on the phone with people. People get so weirded out, like they just won't answer their phone anymore if you call. It's like send a text message, but don't like no, I'm not gonna like answer the phone. And so it's funny. But one of my friends, Kelsey, she just recently moved back to Nashville from Colorado. But we actually met through Instagram. This was like 5 or 6 years ago. When we were both kind of initially starting our blogs and met. We got coffee in real life, and then she moved to Colorado quickly, pretty soon after. But we stayed friends, talked on the phone. I mean, probably every other week for the last 5 years, and
Oh, wow.
moved back. Yeah, and so she was one of those friends, but she was the only friend that I had that I would talk to on the phone, and it was kind of like, well, how else are we going to talk if we don't talk on the phone? But
Yeah.
I'm on a campaign to bring this back because I've just found that it, that's an easy way to connect with people. I can call someone. I've got a 15-minute drive to work. I'll call you on my way home, check in, hey,
Yeah.
how's it going? It doesn't have to be anything. Um, it doesn't have to be anything crazy and crazy. And this, I was talking to my husband about this the other day, and I was like, I'm kind of embarrassed that I'm making this correlation, but I think you might appreciate it because you're in the marketing space. But it's almost like how many impressions you have to make on somebody
Mm.
before they're gonna buy, and it's
Yeah.
almost like you just have to continue like showing up and reaching out to people and inviting them, being like, hey, can you go get coffee tonight? Hey, come to wine night, or call them, and it goes to voicemail so many times, and then and that's, I don't know, I wish that it wasn't, I wish it didn't seem so much, I don't know, I wish it didn't seem so difficult, but it's not. It's simple, but it's just like you just gotta show up and do it. You gotta call people, and when you say let's hang out, actually follow up on it. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's nothing like, it's nothing revolutionary. I think it's just and then I think there's an element too. I was talking to my sister-in-law recently, um, and she was kind of just talking about being in a hard place, not a ton of community, just from 2020 and COVID, and both her and her husband working from home. And I was like, okay, Jess, listen, you know, on every Monday at 10 a.m. you're gonna call me, and we're just gonna catch up for 30 minutes, hour, however long we have, and then on Wednesday you're gonna call our other sister-in-law, Cassie, and y'all are gonna check up, and then on Friday you're gonna pick someone else and call them. And I was like, it's simple. And I was like, Monday's gonna roll around and you're just gonna want to put it off, or not, just not do it or whatever. But I was like, we're gonna do this, and then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, go on a walk, take your dog out, go on a walk with your friend, whatever. And it's just simple rhythms like that, I think, of reaching out and connecting with people, that it's not, you don't have to, it doesn't take a lot of time, but it takes intentionality, which I think ends up being the stumbling block for people, and just kind of the biggest hurdle to get over.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like you said before, it's not that like any of this is rocket science, but I also know for a fact we're also not the only two people on planet Earth who struggle with this either. And so, whether it's your personal life or whether it's your business, the reality is the building blocks of relationship building are pretty simple, and yet here we are struggling with it. And if business didn't struggle with it, they would all be growing like crazy. If people didn't struggle with it, they would have vibrant communities. But the reality is we often find ourselves in a place where that's not true. And there's a part of it. The most annoying part is that it's a simple answer.
Yeah, it's like I almost wish that it was really complicated and unattainable, and that it was like some elusive thing out there that it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I really do this, but it's pretty simple. Yeah, you just, yeah.
So when it comes to like the brand that you're building right now, what are some things that you have done to like really stand out in the marketplace? Because surely you are not the only one talking about lifestyle or authenticity or family life. So what is it that you do that really helps you stand out and put that little twist on it, right? Because the podcast is Death to Vanilla. So it's just kind of this idea that like if your thing is the same as someone else's thing, then no one's going to find you. And so what have you done to really like stand out and find your place in the world?
So a couple things. First, I would say, well, I hope this is true. I hope I'm not like falsely elevating myself, but my love and my passion is writing. And so, I have a podcast. I, do, post on social media, but what I love the most is writing. And I hope that I can write 100 books before I die. And so
Dang.
for me, it's kind of, I've dabbled a little bit over the years. I've done some blog collaborations. I've done social media campaigns, and sometimes it's like, okay, that's what pays, that's what pays the bills. That's what pays for this. And there is a place for that. But part of it for me too, I think, is just keeping my eye on the prize of like, I want to write books. That's what I'm good at. That's what I'm passionate about. And finally, fast forward, 6 years after launching my blog, I just landed a publishing contract a couple months back with a dream publisher. I have
Mm.
an agent, kind of one of those things that it was like, okay, God, like you have been really faithful through this whole thing. You asked me to show up and and do what you gifted me to do, which is right, and be a faithful steward of it, put in the work, and wait for the right opportunity and the right time, and you finally brought that along. So I would say one of it is I feel like I've kind of stayed true to the course, which it feels bad. And I had a phone call last week with someone who was putting together an online summit and wanted me to speak and be part of it. And everyone that kind of participates in it, they'll have their own little 30-minute snippet, and then they'll have their way that you can get on their email list and put them through your marketing campaign, onboard them as a client, whatever. And I was just like, listen, I don't. I speak and I do workshops, but I was like, I'm working on a book right now, and that's my bread and butter, and I'm not trying to, I you know, it's hard because you see the value, and it's like, oh yeah, like, engaged people that, would be that you to get on your email list. That's important, but at the same time, it's also like just having to remind yourself that it's like you can't say yes to everything, and so say yes to um, just say yes to the things that actually are gonna I don't know, because kind of like we talked about, it's like in the entrepreneur world you can spread yourself so thin and be good at a lot of things but not great at one thing. And so um yeah, just trying to, I think that's one thing I would hope that set me apart, is that my focus and my love, and I think my gifting is in writing, and it's not in podcasting or having a YouTube channel or all these other things, even though sometimes they go along. And then I think the other thing too is in this world, in this world of authenticity, and this is where it gets kind of strange with social media. Um, there's a lot of, I think, kind of false vulnerability and authenticity that you see out there. And I don't say false in the sense that people are meaning to be deceptive or malicious or anything, but I think that vulnerability and authenticity first happens in community and connection. And I think, that can be within your marriage, that can be within your family, within a small group of people, your friends, your neighbors, kind of the people that you do life with.
Yeah.
And it's easy to, kind of like we were just talking about, it's really easy to have this kind of counterfeit connection.
Hmm.
You haven't actually shown up authentically or shown up vulnerably in your life, but you're trying to do it on social media, and so it's coming across as kind of like not, I don't know, it's not the real thing, because that's not something I think that is supposed to happen on social media.
Right.
There can be a really lovely byproduct from it that you offer, that encourages other people. But I think for me, I'm not the kind of person, I don't really post, like if I post something that's, you know, pretty honest and a little bit hard, it's never real time in the moment. I've dealt with whatever.
Mm,
I've done the work, whether it's with my spouse, whether it's, sat my butt on the therapist's couch and talked through something,
yeah.
or kind of lived it out and worked it out. I don't post a whole lot in real time, because to me, that's time that it's like, I don't need to be turning outward to people that just like know who I am. I need to turn inward to the people that, that are holding me accountable to who I am, and to who I want to be, and who are going to encourage me, and kick my butt at times when I need that, rather than, because I think social media, it's such a funny world. I mean, it's brutal. Like, people are awful, but it's also the place that you can just go there and get away with just feeling good about yourself and feeling like you're doing fine, and you don't need to do any kind of personal work, or you don't have any, it's one of those places that you can
Right.
slide by in life, and kind of get off the hook for maybe some places that you need to do some work.
Right.
But yeah, so I would hope that those are things that set me apart. Just that I would hope that my authenticity, you can take from a place of having processed and having done the work offline before putting it online, and
Right.
then just kind of like keeping my eye on one thing, which is, I'm a writer, and that's what I want to be good at. That's what I love doing. So yeah.
Well, you're much nicer than I am, because I actually do feel like some people are purposely being a crappy people online. And but part of that is because, like, and I don't mean like bad as a person.
Yeah.
What I mean is they're using authenticity as a tactic
Yeah.
rather than being authentic.
Yeah.
And so it's like and it feels, you can kind of tell, and I don't know how, but like you go on there, I think it's because, and you and I talked about this in our getting acquainted call, where it's like they share something that's like a little not appropriate to be shared online. And so then you're like, okay, so then did you just read a post about authenticity and then decide to share something horribly personal
Yeah.
because you're looking for a reaction?
Yes.
You know
Yes.
what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
Kind of like the shock factor. It's kind of like,
yes.
oh, I don't know that was totally appropriate or necessary, or yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's a strange world. It's like, with all the great things that social media has given us, it's also opened up this platform for people to just, yeah, really. I feel like on some level inappropriately share. It's like, that
Yeah.
doesn't need to be broadcasted to the whole world. You can talk about that within your circle of people, but maybe not. Maybe not the whole world.
Well, I think the tactic, if you will, that you shared, I think is genius, which is you don't share it in real time. You share it in retrospect, because there's a difference between there's how do I say this? There's a difference between sharing something and being honest about how hard it really was, and sharing something in a moment of hurt.
Yeah.
Because usually, I mean, like, let's be honest, I mean, just with our interactions with other human beings, like in family or friends, when you're hurt, you usually say something in a way that you didn't really intend.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it was hurtful for the other person, or you accused someone, or you said something a little too far about like yourself, like too personal, or what have you, that ends up like, you end up apologizing for something at some point when you start talking out of hurt as opposed to retrospect. And so I think that's so wise what you were talking about, which is like, have a moment to let it sit, work through it, whether it's with someone else, like you said, with a therapist, or whether it's something where you just need to like cool off. And I think that's where that ends up becoming like really uncool, is where you get those people, and I see this a lot on Twitter, actually, because of the fact that it's text based. We're like, you would not believe the thing that I just saw, and they're just so mad and
Yeah.
heated, and they just kind of come across as like a negative Nancy because at the end of the day, they're just kind of like getting heated and sharing, and it comes across as like out of control and unnecessary and abrasive, all of which things that as a company you wouldn't want to be known for, and personally probably don't want to be known for either. So taking that time. So I love what you said about that, just being wise and taking time to like settle down, process, have some retrospect, and then be brave enough to share
Mhm.
how it actually was.
Yeah. Well, and kind of like you said, sharing things in, like in the moment when you're hurt. I think about it in the sense that it's like when I get really frustrated with my husband, it's like it's anger, it's frustration, it's emotion in that moment. But if I can even just shut my mouth for 5 minutes and like take a deep breath, and it's like, okay, I can actually come back to him and say, you know, what I'm really feeling is I'm really feeling sad, or I'm feeling scared, or, I'm feeling whatever way, rather than just reacting out of this emotion. And when it's in retrospect, it's more thoughtful, and it's actually more, I think it's more accurate.
Yeah.
I've followed this influencer for a while, and she has just been getting just destroyed recently because she went dark for a while on social media, and came out, I don't know, 6 8 months later, and was just like, yeah, it's been the hardest 8 months of my life. My husband and I separated, and now we're getting divorced. And
Mm,
people have just been like, some people have been really kind and really supportive, and then other people have just been awful, in the sense that it's like, you know just kind of like really crucifying her for living this like influencer life of sharing real life in real time. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe like she did make money off of sharing, real things in real time, but also she's human. And so give her a minute, and good for her for taking time off and not broadcasting everything in the moment. I get that some people feel like, oh, we were lied to, we thought that your life was perfect and it's not. And but I you there's I mean, like, I know it's hilarious. It's like, okay,
yeah.
y'all, obviously look at your own life. But yeah, I don't know. I think I just it's it, social media has, again, not to like beat a dead horse, it's given us so many great things, but that's one of
Yeah.
the things that people can lose perspective on. And it's like, actually, maybe we need to get offline and process things, walk through things, and then come back and in retrospect, whether retrospect is 2 days later, 2 weeks, 2 years later, whatever it is, come to it, because then it comes from a more metered, thoughtful, a more grounded way, rather than just kind of inflamed in the moment of hurt or emotion. Um,
Right.
so yeah.
How else, like what other, like I call these things tactical things of like, oh, like I'm going to wait X amount of time before I say something. What other things do you think people should do that you've done or you've heard of people do that really help someone be authentic online, whether it's a brand or a personal brand or just a human being in general? Um, what are some ways that you can share authentically in a good way?
I think in the personal space, I'm a huge advocate for counseling. And I don't think, I mean, you don't have to go to like some crazy, like, week long intensive thing. Like, you could just see a therapist for a couple months, in a season of life. But I think that we have so many life experiences, and so many people have had traumatic experiences, that it's just helpful to have someone unpack those with you, and that can help you show up in a more authentic way. Because
Mm,
interesting, what I've seen a lot of times, and I don't think people do this from a malicious intent, but you're like, when you see them do it, it's like, oh, that's not great. But I think people end up in a endeavor to be authentic, they end up kind of like causing secondary trauma to people. And I'll
mm,
pat myself out on this. um I'm an 8, and so sometimes I just get bored. And so, if we're at the dinner table at my parents' house, and like, one of my sisters is annoying me, or I don't know, if we're just somewhere and the conversation hits a lull, I'll tell some really outrageous story about this patient that I took care of, or this person that walked in the ER with this injury, or something like that, or something that someone did, something that someone said that's just like shocking. Um, and and yeah, it's funny and it's gross and it's humorous and it's, it's all the things.
Yeah.
But really, when I look at it and reflect on it, I'm like, I said that I shouldn't have told that story then, or I said that was more of my deal. Like I should not have done that in that moment. And I think a lot of times people can unintentionally. It's not a social media is not a space to unpack your trauma. It's not a safe it's not a
Yeah.
good sounding board.
It's so true.
It's like go spend some time in prayer, go spend some time with the Lord, go see a good therapist, go like get in real community. But I think that's one thing that can happen. People mean well to like share an experience that other people have been through, but it kind of like secondarily causes trauma to people. Like I saw someone, it made me really sad. I saw this mom, she posted about SIDS because she had this has been like 5 years ago now, but she had her 7-month-old died of SIDS. And like horrible, tragic. But the post, as I was reading it, I'm like, my heart starts racing as a mom. I like start sweating. I'm like, oh my gosh, like my kid's gonna die of SIDS tonight. And realizing that it was like, I don't think that she meant anything awful about this, but
Yeah.
any other mom of an infant is gonna read this post and go off the deep end. And so yeah, I think people, they don't mean it maliciously, but it's like, you haven't really dealt with this with a counselor or with Jesus, or in whatever relationship, it's just coming out on social media in a way that's kind of traumatizing other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's super smart. I mean, like, because I don't want to open up a totally different can, but like when we look at something like cancel culture, where you're essentially like one off-color comment from being just eradicated, which cancel culture was hopefully initially started with good intentions, but it has since been abused, in my most humble opinion, and so. Unfortunately, now what it means is anything that anyone says that lots of people disagree with gets canceled, as opposed to, dealt with in some sort of humane fashion. It's like Blair Witch not Blair Witch Project. That's a horror movie. Like the what am I thinking? I guess it is the Blair Witch burnings, right? Where they would just hunt people down and burn them because they thought they might be a witch. But it's the same kind of thing that's happening on social media. And so, but you got to be conscious of that as a business and as a human being. And, so taking some time to not, like you said, process your trauma online and things of that nature, because you are putting yourself at risk of creating situations, and just being thoughtful of the other people too. Like you said, I would find it hard to imagine that the lady wrote that post with the intention at any level, or even thought that that was possible. And you certainly can't think through every outcome, right? It's like when you give your kid a name, you don't know what names the other kids are going to make fun of them with. Like, you can't think of all of them. Kids are more creative, especially when they want to hurt other kids. And so, but I think the same thing happens online, where we forget that what we say matters and has an impact on other people, and we got to think about that too. Obviously, you can almost get yourself in a space where you can't say anything because something is going to offend someone or hurt someone or trigger them, and I don't want to belittle that at all. But like you said, that post made you freak out.
Yeah.
And that was never the intention. So I just think I think kind of where we're landing is just like this mindfulness about social media. Mindfulness in the sense that treat it with respect, treat it as a place where you can be authentic and show up real, but also just being mindful of the fact that what you say has an impact, it matters, and that in an attempt to do something good, you can accidentally do something bad. And so just taking that wisdom and that time to process, rather than hurrying up and posting, both for a business and for a person, can prevent you from getting what you're working so hard to build totally tanked.
Yeah. Well, and like you said with cancel culture, yeah, I think it probably started out with good intention, but it's gone off the rails. And I think on some level too, we would all do well to be a little bit more gracious towards people with the things
Mm-hmm.
that they say. And now there are some things that are completely obscene, and it's like, okay, that's just there's a right and wrong component, but then there's some of it that it's like someone's opinion. Like let them have their opinion. You know,
Yeah.
let them have free speech. But you know, I think that I think in general, it's really sad to me. There was a couple really specific things that happened in 2020 that I remember seeing people, you know, kind of in the online space post something that was insensitive. It wasn't like
Mm.
egregious what they said, but it was just insensitive, and how people just crucified them for it. And a couple different responses. One was the CEO of a company here in Nashville, and and he came back and tried to sincerely apologize, and it was so painful. But it was like I think he was a 40-year-old man that had probably never apologized for anything in his life before, and so he was trying to sincerely do it and really sucking at it, but people were just destroying him, even though he was
Mm.
trying to be sincere. And that made me really sad because I was like, okay, here's this guy who, like, yeah, he said something that was really rude and insensitive, but now he's trying to say that he's sorry, and he's really sucking at it because he's probably never done it before in his life. And who knows how he grew up? Who knows, like, you know,
Yeah.
who his mentors in business have been? Maybe he's just never had it modeled for him. But rather than just like completely canceling him and just like ruining his reputation and his business, like maybe say like, hey, you know what, let's give you some skills, some tools on like how to sincerely apologize, and maybe how to be more thoughtful and tactful in the future with what you post instead of just like canceling you completely. And then there was another one, the CrossFit CEO, or the former one, and he said something and then just like doubled down on it. And that's another thing too, that it's like when people double down, it's like maybe have a little humility that it's like maybe I am wrong, or maybe what I did say was really offensive to people even though I did not intend for it to be. um,
Right.
but I think also as an audience too, we could be a little bit more gracious with people, that like everyone's a work in progress. And cancel culture is a little bit scary these days in the sense that it's like, you know, these college kids are posting things online, and like, I mean, I would have posted stupid things online when I was 18 too, if I had Instagram when I was in college. But it's like, you know, they're not getting jobs when they graduate because it's like this one time, this one kid tweeted this one thing, and
Yeah.
forever and always, like they're not going to get a job at this company and this corporation, whatever. And so I think that there's a lot of space for us to have grace and understanding that people grow and change, and that people they say stupid, ignorant things. Maybe they know better, maybe they don't.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. I think there could be a lot more kindness and compassion for people in the cancel culture world, because we've all done really stupid things. Some of them have just been more public, than others. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think just in general, like I guess the thing that I just keep coming back to when we have this conversation is just make sure that you're modeling whatever you want to have happen online in real life. And so if you're having difficulty being authentic online, it might be because you're having difficulty being authentic in person. If you're having trouble building relationships online, it could be because you're having trouble building relationships in real life. And so I think just starting with like the inner circle, if you will, of your life, to be able to just start there and build out. And I think at that point you get yourself in a place where you're a lot healthier. So when you are a solopreneur, or if you're a marketer inside of a company, then you show up a much more whole, healthy person, in which case the work that you do ends up becoming better as well. And let's be honest, business is based almost entirely on relationships. And so you being a healthy, whole, good person, that's got good relationships is only going to be a benefit.
yeah,
It may not help you figure out how to run the most optimized Facebook ad, but at the end of the day,
yeah,
that's only one of many, many strategies to build and grow and stand out. So yeah, just keeping that in mind. That's my takeaway, at least from what you've shared today. So I appreciate that. So cool. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on the show. Really, really appreciate it. We're wrapping up on time here, and so if you could just give people on online just a little shout out to where they can find you. Obviously, we'll have stuff in the show notes, comments, or whatnot as far as social media and handles and stuff like that, or where you want people to find you. But yeah, just give a little shout out where people can find you and what they can learn about you.
I am on Instagram at Meredith W. Boggs, and then my website is meredithwboggs.com. If you're a Facebook person, it's linked on my website. We can connect there as well. So yeah, that's where I'm at. That's where you can find me. And thank you so much for having me today.
Awesome. Well, it was my pleasure. So thank you for being on.